So let's start with spiritual battles because you and I were both talking about spiritual battles and so what made you write about the three enemies of the mental health and how does that connect with spiritual battles?
Yeah, so uh, shortly after I gave my life to Jesus, the Lord called me into the field of counseling, and I went back to school, got my clinicals done, started doing internships, and just ironically enough, I specialized in both clinical and biblical counseling. And so when I started seeing patients who were professing Christians, I noticed that they were struggling with the same battles as non believers were struggling with. And so, as I started seeing them, treating them years and years after that, I started noticing a pattern that we have three enemies, and collectively, those three enemies are literally linked to the top three clinical diagnoses that are plaguing our nation. And those three enemies are our infernal enemy, that is the devil. Our infernal enemy, we call him that because he comes directly against God's will for our lives. The second enemy is our flesh, and that is our sinful nature. Our sinful nature trying to exert our own will against God's will, right? And that is our own internal enemy. That's the consequence of the fall. And the third enemy we have to deal with in this life is the world, and that is our external enemy. By external enemy, I mean the people's influence over our lives, trying to get us off track, out of God's will or God's plan for our lives. And so these three enemies are directly linked to the top three diagnoses. And those are number one, clinical anxiety, clinical depression. And the third one that keeps fluctuating, that is mood disorders.